one. So the first one is entitled "I've Fallen for a Slut," and it goes something like this. Now I know this sounds crazy, but there's this girl who I've been friends with for a few months now, and she's a bit of a slut. But if I'm honest, it has been often said about her because she slept with so many people. But besides being a slut, she's a really funny, adventurous kind person who really is a lot of fun to be around. She's also really good looking. Over the past couple of weeks, this friend and I have started getting with each other on nights out quite a fair bit. I guess I've always found her very attractive, but because I've had a girlfriend, I've never taken action. However, me and my girlfriend have now split up. The bad thing is, this girl now has a boyfriend, but he cheats on her a lot and treats her really badly. I'm aware this is kind of wrong, but I've still been doing things with this girl even though she's with her boyfriend. I justify it in my head that he deserves it for the way he treats her. But I know really it's not right. Thing is, I'm not the only guy she does things with. There are loads of us in my position. The thing is, I'm starting to develop really strong feelings for her, which is obviously bad for so many reasons. The fact that she's a slut doesn't even seem to put me off. I'm just really into her, but wish I wasn't, because she's obviously nothing but trouble. I guess what I'm interested in is, A, has something similar ever happened to anyone else? And B, if it has, how did the story develop? And B, and the other is, does anyone have any advice on how I can move on from this and no longer feel the way that I do? Okay, well, thank you very much for the question, is the first thing that I would say. And I actually want to say I'm really sorry about your girlfriend. I mean, I know you briefly obviously mentioned the fact that you split up with your girlfriend, and I want to apologize. You know, I think like anyone going through a breakup, we all deal with breakups differently. We all deal with the healing process differently. And I want to apologize to you, because clearly you must be someone who is hurting. If you say that you were in a relationship before, and you obviously have broken up from that relationship, you must still be going through a healing process. Now, I know some people, their healing process can be a week, some people it can be a day, and for some people it can be a year. But I just want to firstly start off by saying I'm really sorry. Obviously, I don't know what happened with your other girlfriend, but I'm really sorry about that. The second thing that I would share with you is I would stop using the word slut. And the reason why I tell you this is because through your entire message, you've kept using all these labels to describe this friend of yours. And the thing is, when you start living your life based, and this, what I'm talking about is a much bigger concept, but when you start living your life based on labels and you start calling people sluts and whatever, at some point, inevitably, people are going to start calling you the same thing. People are going to start defining you by the labels that they see you as. That's the problem. Right? So if you start being a dickhead, everybody's going to call you a dickhead. If you start getting in debt, everybody's going to see you from the prism of being in debt. Which kind of leads me to the other thing that I wanted to share with you, which is that this whole scenario, you're making it out to be about the girl, but this whole scenario isn't about the girl. This whole scenario is really actually about you. This entire scenario is really about your morality, because the issue is, this girl clearly knows or isn't aware of the fact that, as you quote her, she's a slut. But that's not your problem for you to tell her how she should and should be living her life. That's her prerogative, right? If she wants to be a slut, that's completely up to her. That's not your job to tell her that she shouldn't live her life like that. What you need to worry about and you need to focus on is, do you want to be associated with somebody who is engaged in those kinds of activities? Because I would share with you that if you are clearly somebody who is having this, what in psychology they call a cognitive dissonance, meaning there's this tug of war, you're basically going against your morality. You know that it's wrong, but you're still doing it. what will eventually happen is it's going to start to erode your self-confidence, and this is going to attach to something way bigger, to do with your mental health, to do with your convictions, to do with your standards about expectation. It's actually going to change the way you see women, right? It's going to change the way you see yourself. It's going to change the way you see other people. And it's a lot more complicated than that, but I don't really want to get into the complexities of it. But I would share with you that this whole scenario really isn't about the girl. This whole scenario is really about you. You know, I very strongly believe that everything that happens in our lives is there to teach us something about us. Okay? Everything. And this scenario that is happening to you right now is teaching you something about you. I think so many times in life, many of us, we go through life and we say, I am like this. But actually, one of the things that really separates going from childhood to adulthood, right? Because there is a lot of males who say that they're mature, who say that they're men, but in reality they're not. What defines going from teenagehood or going from childhood to adulthood, in part, is understanding that you have to start living integriously. Meaning that the word integrity means to be one. It means to be whole. It means that both what you say and what you do is integrated. It's the same. And I would share with you that if you truly want to develop to become the highest possible version of what it means to be a male, then I would share with you that you need to start living integriously with what you say and what you do. Because you talk about the fact that being, clearly the way you've written this is that being a slut is a bad thing. Yet you, number one, are associating with somebody who's like that, which means that you clearly must think it's okay. And number two, you're actually engaging in the activity. So you're actually perpetuating it. You are fueling the very thing that you say you don't like, that you're up against. In fact, it would come across as though you believe that somebody who is a slut in some way is somebody who is a bad person, right? And as I say, that everything that happens to us is really a reflection of us. So I would say to you that you, as you've written this, there is this constant contradiction. You say that she's a slut, but you say that she's a good person and she's actually fun to be around. What that really is a reflection of you. You are going through this internal battle within yourself. And I would share with you that the problem isn't to focus on her. The problem is you need to focus on you. You need to look at yourself and ask yourself, what is it about this situation that is teaching me about me? Is it that I'm a judgmental person? Is it that I've realized that I'm somebody who sees the world from the prism of what people do, not what their essence is? Right? You want to begin to look at this. Now, let me actually go back and actually answer the questions that you've actually asked, which is, has anybody else ever been in a similar situation? Of course, loads of people have been in a similar situation, right? But it doesn't really matter about other people, because this is your life and you can't control what other people do. All you can control is what you do. So number one is you need to figure out, is this a situation that you want to engage in, that you want to be involved in? The other question that you ask is, does anybody else have any advice about how to move on from this? I would go and say that that's the wrong question. The question is, do you even want to move on from this, right? Because you say that it's a bad thing, but yet you're still engaging in it. So the question isn't that, is it a bad thing or isn't it a bad thing, and how do you move on from it? The question is, do you want to move on from it? Do you still want to engage in it? Because look, and this is where I say you've really got to look at the prism in which you're seeing the world from. It is okay for you to engage in this activity, but not be a bad person, right? Because as I said to you before, there are some people who, in your words, are sluts, and they're okay with that. That isn't a problem. But in your definition and the way that you've put this, is that being a slut is a bad thing. So you need to figure out for yourself, is this something that you want to move from? Is this a bad thing for you to engage in? And when you start seeing things from that perspective, I think it should be able to give you a different perspective and a different light on this whole concept. I just ask you to sit on it, right? And I think really look at what I say, which is that every situation in our lives is there to teach us something about us. And look at what is this situation teaching you about you. And it's something that you're actually going to have to think about, right? You're going to have to think about, well, what am I learning from this? Well, what is she teaching me? A lot of the times when we experience problem in our lives, the tendency that most of us have is to blame everybody and everything on the outside, right? Many of us, for example, in your situation, you're blaming her. Everything would come about as if it's her fault, and she in some way is luring you into this trap, and she in some way is engaging you in this kind of a taboo, horrible act that you don't want to be engaged in. But the reality is, you are choosing to engage in it. She's not forcing you, right? You are engaging in it. Like, of course, it may be difficult and it may be hard, and she's really attractive, but ultimately, you are making the decision to engage in it or not, or whether not to engage in it. And that's really what you need to look at. That's the bit that you need to examine. Let me finish off by saying to you that as I began off earlier on, I said to you that you want to be very careful by judging people and labeling people based on the things that they do. Because at some point, all of us make errors in judgment. All of us, we fuck up. All of us, we go in the wrong direction. And I warn you that if you perpetuate that and you go down that path of judging people based on what they do, not who they are at their essence, when your time comes, everybody is going to judge you. And in fact, I would flip this entire situation around and say, could it be that you are actually using her? You know that she's vulnerable. Because let's think about this. If somebody is in a situation where they're, especially a girl, right? We know that it is taboo and it's not perceived as something which is a virtue for a woman to be sexually active with many different partners, right? Most countries and traditions around and cultures around the world would agree that this is a bad thing, right? Now, so it means that if a girl is engaging in that activity, number one, it means that she's very promiscuous. She doesn't care what people think. She is going through a lot of pain, and the way that she's going through a lot of pain is she's basically allowing people to abuse her sexually, whatever it may be, right? But the point being is, you know this, and yet you're exploiting her. You see, it's the same situation. But now when I judge, I'm now judging you based on what you're doing, not actually what your intention is. You know, I read a book many years ago by a guy called John Maxwell. And John Maxwell said that most of us, we judge people by what they do, and we judge ourselves by the reasons why we do it. I ask you to consider this question. Are you judging her based on what she's doing, or are you judging her based on the reasons why she's doing what she's doing? Because I've learned in my life that context matters. The reason why somebody is doing something matters. And if you don't know why she's doing it, and you just judge her based on the action, you were actually the villain. You were actually the bad guy, right? Think about this and I was actually writing this in my book recently, when somebody is convicted of like a murder and they're going through the trial, one of the things that everybody wants to know is a context. Why did they commit the murder? What circumstances led up to the person? Were they drunk? Were they in a rage? Did they have an argument? What was it that led up to the person committing the murder? Because the context matters. My question to you is, do you know the context in this situation? Just something for you to think about. All right.